Bava Metzia Daf Yudalid Omud Aleph. In the bottom of the page, the Omar Abaye. That's where we are to start the new month with Omar Abaye. Says Abaye another statement regarding Torkois. Reuven shemocher sodo l'Shimon shelo ba'achrayis. Reuven sold a field to Shimon without achrayis. Means there's no warranty. If anything happens, don't come back to me. Yeah, let's say either nothing in the star, or according to Shmuel, it's written in the star that there is no achrayis. You should know this sale is no guarantee. Lo ba'achrayis. V'yotze oleo asikin. Actually, no. By mechira, by selling, we don't say achrayas to soifer. By mechira, if it doesn't say that there's an achrayas, no achrayas. If anything happens to the field, meaning if people come and claim it, people come and say that it's theirs. I have creditors, I have stories, yeah, and they take the field away from you. Don't come to me. Okay, very nice. The yotze ole asikin ad shlo yichzik bo. Before the person actually got to get hold of the land, says the Rambam, he made the kinyan. There was already a halachic transaction. There was a kinyan. However, the person, the kohen, the buyer, the customer, never actually got to live in it or even be there. He didn't come to do the minimal chazaka, the minimal behavior like a regular client. He never got to enjoy it even 1 second. And already then, before he even came, the oirin are seeking people who claim that it's there. They came. Already people came and said the field is stolen, it's ours, there are stories. Then big chiddush says the Gemara, Yudal Amud Beis, yochel lachzor boi. He can go back on the sale. Why can he go back on the sale? Although there was a kinyan, says the Rambam, and solves the problem of many Rishonim, there was a kinyan, but there's always that extra bit between kinyan and actually coming to the field. If there was a kinyan, let's say there was money given, or shtar. You know the kinyan took place in Tel Aviv. You know what the field is? In Katzrin, up north. Yeah, he's never been there. It's all on paper. And before, while he's traveling from Tel Aviv up north to enjoy his new field for the first time, he's been getting nasty phone calls from people, on his phone in the car, saying this field is really ours, it's stolen. That level of lack of warranty, is considered as mekachtos. It's not even mekachtos. It's not. In other words, it's already. It's actually it's mekachtos. Yeah, actually it is mekachtos. Sorry, it's mekachtos, which means such a mechira that the oirin came so quickly, so early before the person got to use the land. That is considered a point in which can be choizer. It can go back. There's no warranty. I know there's no warranty. But to the level of people coming giving me a hard time before I ever got to use it, that such a in that stage a person may be choizer. However, once the person was machzik, as we'll see later, in a minimal way, once already there was a kinyan, and let's say a second after another kinyan, excuse me, there was kinyan already. Once he already was in the field, and we'll see later what he did in the field, some kind of minimal physical holding onto the land and being in the land, acting like an owner. If at that point, from that point onwards, the oirin came, the people who claim not troublemakers, the people who claim that it's theirs, they came and they said it's really ours, then he cannot go back anymore. Why? The Omer Lei, at that point, you can tell him, the seller, you can tell the buyer, I sold you a bag full of baloney, full of garbage, a bag full of what? Full of katri, full of all kinds of shmatis, all kinds of nuts and ties, which means in Hebrew we say a cat in the bag. If I sold your field with no achrayus, it means no achrayus. The oirim came, the people who claim, the claimants, they came and they claimed that the field is theirs. Thank you. That's why you paid accordingly for a field with no achrayus. And there was already a stage of kinyan, and there was a stage of actually being there physically post the kinyan. At that point, that's a point of no return. That's how the Rambam explains the sugya, and that's a tremendously beautiful hezber. That second chazaka, which is not the regular kinyan chazaka, that second stage after the kinyan, the stage of actually being there, and that stage at the point of no return anymore, even if there were me'oirerin, if there were claimants coming after that, what does that consist of? Michidayesh amatzri. Daesh amatzri, says Rashi, that he took actually the meitzarim, the borders of the field, he fixed them up. He made a bit of a ramp, he elevated them a bit, showing this is my place. I'm almost sure that the other Rishonim said that he walks. It's enough to walk. Ladush is like to trample. To walk on the Mitzorim is good enough. Now, that's where we finished off before my little Ben Azmani. The Ikadamri, some say, and that's what we're holding now. Afilu ba'achrayus nami. Even if the field was sold with achrayus, let's say the field was sold Yud Dalid Amud base, the fourth line. Yad Dalid. Yud Dalid base, fourth line from the top of the page. Afilu ba'achrayus nami. Some say, even if the field was sold with achrayus, a field with achrayus? What do you mean? What does achrayus mean? If anything happens to the field, if people start talking and telling you that the field is theirs, don't worry. Warranty, guarantee, responsibility, accountability, all these Israeli words. Yeah. Achrayus means what? You can go back to me and I'll give you a new field or I'll give you cash instead. Says the Gemara now, even if the field was sold by achrayus, the seller can tell the buyer, don't come to me. What? Don't come to me? What do you mean? What's achrayus? Says the Gemara, the Omer Lei, the seller tells the buyer, I'm not shirking off or shaking off responsibility. No, I'm telling you, wait. Achvi tarfach, show me your shtar from Beis Din. Soon I'll explain what that means. Shalom aloch, and then I'll pay you. Which means, let's say the person, is driving down to his field in the Golan from Tel Aviv, okay, and he's getting the phone call, okay, or even after he's already there, he gets very dirty phone calls saying, this field really belongs to us. Shall he right away give up, give in, and run back to the seller and say, give me a new field? The seller has the right to say, wait, maybe you'll be able to actually fight them up, or maybe we can. In other words, just because they did not yet took you to Beis Din, right? True. If they take you to Beis Din, and if they win the case, that it's really their field, and if Beis Din listens to them, and Beis Din gives you a shtar, Beis Din gives you a document that says sachar talfa litrof is to charge, to collect. If they give you a shtar saying that those people who gave you those nasty phone calls, they really are the legal halachic owners of the field, and they have the right to come there tomorrow morning and actually live there, at that point I'll pay you. But don't be too afraid too quickly. Many times, what happens if somebody chas v'shalom gets a scary red letter from Bituach Leumi? Never happens. Or from some court or from state. You don't give in right away. Go to a lawyer. Go to a friend. Go to an accountant. Go to somebody that can help you. And first, daven to Hashem. And many times, these issues can be solved, right? You don't right away say, oh, Yochen Vei, and I'm paying Bituach Leumi right away, and then I'm asking someone else to pay me back. No. First of all, deal with the issue. And only if the field will be really halachically, surely, certainly taken away from you, at that point, you go to the seller who does have responsibility, and he'll compensate you with another field. That's the end of this case, and now we're starting a new case. Ellen and then Jeff, you are giving me time to draw a nice picture on the whiteboard while I'm listening to your questions. Yes. Thank you. Itmar. A person sold the field to his friend. Comes out that the field really does not belong to him. In other words, a person sold the field to his friend. Reuven is the owner, the real owner of the field, worth 1 million. And then somebody called seller thief Shimon. He did not buy it from him. He took it from him. And he sold it to the buyer, very nice, for 1 million. He didn't make money on it. He didn't make money on it. He sold it, thought it worth million, and he sold it for 1 million to the buyer. Now comes, surprisingly, Mr. Real Owner, victim, I'd call him in England, Victor the victim. He comes now to the new buyer and says, excuse me, the field you bought really is not yours. Never was. It never belonged to Shimon, belongs to me. And now I want to get it back, obviously, and Beis Din obviously endorses him. Let's take the emotions out of the story. Nobody says Shimon is a nice guy. Please do not offer him as a shidduch to my daughter. Cannot other guys, yes, but not the thief. He's not a good guy. However, let's remove any emotions about Geneva over here. The question is now, who compensates Mr. Buyer? Because who got his field back? The owner, obviously. Who should he run back to? The thief who sold him, right? Apparently, it's not so simple. Rav says, Yesh lo mois v'yesh lo shevach. That was not a typing mistake. Now, this is not a spelling mistake or number mistake. It was worth 1, now it's worth 1.5. Because the new buyer, he invested in the apartment and also in the flat. It was run down. It was 1 million. Now there's a new kitchen. Now there's a new floor. And even a nice Hungarian chandelier he got from Bava Park. So now the house is very nicely invested. And now it's worth 1.5 million. Now Mr. Owner snatched, so not snatched. He got back what he deserves. And now the apartment is worth 1.5. Yeah, because he invested in it. Now, so now the buyer, it's how that works. I'm going to explain it soon. The question that Rav just addressed is, when Mr. Buyer goes to Mr. Seller Thief and says, excuse me, you owe me the basic, the 1 million, plus the half that I invested that was snatched by the owner. Everybody here is going to ask, well, Mapitom, why should the real owner, why should he get the nice apartment? Yeah, why should he get the other extra 500,000? The answer, right? Because it wasn't his. What was stolen from him was 1 million. And yet he does get, the owner goes and gets the extra 1.5 from the new buyer. Why is that? There are different explanations of the Rishonim. I'm following Rashi, traditional. Says Rashi, the apartment originally was 1.5 really. And Mr. Stupid Ganev made it worth less. He mistreated it. Now it was worth 1. And now the buyer brought it back to its original glory. Yeah. So really 1.5 was stolen from the original owner, and 1.5 is taken back, is brought back to him. But Lamaisa, the one who owes everything is the thief. The thief seller is the one who actually sold him 1 million, and the 500,000 is also his fault that the first one is missing. So the buyer now justifiably 1.5, the one of the basic amount, plus the 500,000 called shvach. What shvach? Improvement. Shevach is an improvement. All of it has to be paid from who? From the thief. He goes back to him and demands the entire 1.5. All 1.5, the basic plus the shevach, everything should be paid by the seller. The question is, why? It's true that he's a Ganev. Why should he pay the extra half? All he stole and sold, it was very, very unfair, was only 1. Why should he pay for the extra half, right? To him, to the buyer. Answer the Rishonim. Either there was achrayus, that's what I just saw this morning, that's what the Sogos Arayvit says. Sogos Arayvit says there was achrayus written. This thief, stupidly, he sold the field with achrayus. If you write achrayus, automatically the shvach, the extra amount, is also added to that. If I sell your field and say anything that happens, including the extra money invested, trust me, you can count on me. Well, I'll count on you. And that's the Chiddush of Rav. Yeah, achrayus automatically includes even extra amounts that were not written mefurish. Once achrayus is there, let's follow this opinion to keep it simple. This Amud is not the easiest in the world, not the hardest. We can understand it very nicely if you listen carefully. But basically, that's the basic idea. Rav says a thief, or anybody else for the matter, that sold the field, and now the field new buyer, that the field was taken away to him, to the original owner, and now he's high and dry, going back to the person who sold it with the achrayus. It includes the shevach as well, the new amount as well. So far, so good. Shmuel Omar, Shmuel says no. Mois yesh loy, shevach en loy. Shmuel says no. He has no more. The mois he has. One says Shmuel like this. Let's divide it to 1.5. Yeah, 1.5, so 1.5. Okay, 1.5. The actual basic amount, he can go back to the seller and say, hey, You sold me 1 million apartment, give me back 1 million. But the extra half that he invested, the value of the new fancy kitchen and the value of the new fancy chandelier, that is something that he cannot go and claim from the seller thief. The question is, why cannot he do that? Why can't he claim from the seller, I want everything taken away from me, both the basic that you sold me plus the investment that I put in it? The question is why, and the Gemara is going to ask why. They asked Ravuna the following question. What would be the story if Mr. Seller Ganav actually wrote black and white, the set by the lawyer, Mr. Thief and his new client, the new buyer, the set by the nice fancy lawyer, and they wrote in clause G15, I don't know, they wrote somewhere what? They wrote that even the shevach, even the extras that would be invested by the client will be compensated and be paid back by the seller in case the apartment is snatched away from him. Let's say it's written black and white. What would Shmuel say then? Because again, what's the argument between Rav and Shmuel? Rav and Shmuel all agree that if the apartment of the buyer from the thief was taken away from him justifiably by Mr. Owner, everyone agrees that the basic million that was sold, of course, he can go back to the Ganev. Ganev, you sold me 1 million, it was taken away. Give me now a new 1 million apartment or cash. That's for sure. The question is the 0.5, the extra half or the extra whatever that you invested in the apartment or in the field, can that also be taken away as part of the responsibility from the seller thief? Yes or no? Says Rav, yes. Yes. Says Rav, yes. Why? Because the Achrayus includes everything. By the way, some Rishonim, Toysus, and many others say even if he did not write the Achrayus is automatically embedded and it's there even with the Shvach and everything. Shmuel says otherwise. Shmuel says the extra 500,000 that you invested, Mr. Buyer, that is not something within the responsibility of the seller. The question is why? What would be if the seller wrote black and white, I am mischayev, I'm committing myself to give you back, compensate you, everything. There's still, it's sad to say, the Gemara still has a reason to think that he still does not have to pay for the extra investment. Why? Explains the Gemara the two tzdodim. The Gemara explains the question, why should I think that it doesn't have to keep his words? Mao. What's the reason? Time at the Shmuel is Shmuel's reason that says you do not have to pay the extra investment, you don't have to compensate for that, you, Mr. Seller, because in a normal case, the person did not actually, did not explicitly mention the extra investment, not mentioned, not included. And that, by the way, if you remember the Gemara from the last week, we said Shevach, Shefer, I'm not saying the right order, Shevach, Shefer, Shibud. All the extras, according to Shmuel, in the case of sale, have to be, it's all in a question. It's all questionable whether it's included or not. Here too, Shevach, as long as it's not mefurash, as long as it's not included outright, explicitly, it's not included. Over here, he did mention it. If clause G5 tells you what, clause A6 tells you really that all extra investment by the buyer will be taken away from him, will be compensated by the seller, then yes, then you have to pay. Stand by your word, man. Oy Dilma, or maybe here comes a whole new reason. Time at the Shmuel could be the reason of Shmuel that says that the Ganev does not have to pay for the extra investment invested by the buyer is a whole new reason. Listen to this very unique, interesting reason. Kevan, the lace lay karka. He has no karka. Was it the seller's karka that he sold? No, he's a thief. It was not really a sale. It was not a sale. It's not a sale. So really, how much did the buyer give him a few months ago? $1 million for the apartment. It was dollars, not shekels. He gave $1 million for what? For a land that wasn't really his. So, and he knew, and we know that eventually that karka will be snatched away from the buyer. I don't know what the seller thinks. He hopes beyond hope something good will happen, that Mashiach will come soon, I hope. Yeah. But Lamaisa, you know what it's called? It's similar to a loan. Yeah, loan, L-O-A-N, not the loan, a loan, which means that when the seller got money from the buyer, when the million exchanged hands, and now the seller had $1 million in his pocket, that was similar to a loan. And how much do we say that the seller, will give the buyer now to compensate him? 1.5. Ooh, that sounds like the R word, which we learned about yesterday in the Humash. Ribis. Not ribis, but it looks like ribis. Looks, smells, and talks like ribis. Says the Gemara, mechzik ribis. Again, let's repeat the reason. The Gemara has it sad, although the Gemara is not yet certain about it. Yeah, really, it's a question posed to Rav Huna. What's the reason of Shmuel? Would Shmuel conceptually agree that the seller Ganav shall actually, yes, compensate the customers and give them the extra 500,000 or 2 million, how much they invested, however much they invested? If he mentioned it, then he has to stand by his words. Or maybe not. Even if he mentioned it by the shtar, because we're dafka talking about a Ganav, not about a regular good guy, which Ellen pointed already before. He's not a good guy who really sold his own field, and this guy's a creditor, like the classical case. It was never, ever, ever his field of the seller. So it's not a real sale. It's not a real sale, and he had money in his pockets temporarily. Temporary money. That reminds me of ribis. We pipe in, yeah? And since you're telling me, if you're telling me that after the buyer lost his pants, and now what, the buyer is homeless, and the buyer would go to the seller and would get back 1.5, oh, that is not ribis, and you can ask a million questions. It's not a loan, it's compensation. You can ask whatever you want. I don't care. I don't, not that I don't care. More doesn't care. Looks like ribis is bad enough. Yeah. But you go on Shabbos with something that looks like cigarette and look like you're smoking? No, and you're not allowed to. Yeah. In other words, certain things you don't want to even look as if it's not the right Yiddish derech. And therefore, you do not compensate in such a way because it looks like ribis. Maybe that's the reason. No questions for the next 5 minutes. Omer Lei answered Rav Huna, and this is an expression that repeats itself the Gemara in the Lav Rafia Biodei. He says yes, no, maybe so. That's what he said in English. Rafia Biodei was like loose in his hand. In other words, Rav Huna didn't really know. Rav Huna didn't really know the answer. Even the Amoraim, they admitted and they said, I don't know. And now comes the answer, and it's going to be very easy. Itmar, but now comes an answer by statement of an Amoira. You know which Amoira? Omar of Nachman, Omar Shmuel. Very good. Rav Nachman was Shmuel's Talmud, Shmuel's friend. Rav Nachman quotes Shmuel himself. Don't lose sight of the ball. Who are we talking all the time here about? Shmuel. Rav's opinion is very clear. You get full compensation down to the last penny. Shmuel is the one who says you don't get full compensation. Why? Comes the Gemara quoting Rav Nachman, Omer Shmuel, saying what? Mois yesh loy shvach en loy. He would always get back the basic amount that he bought from the Schwindler, from this cheating, from this fraudulent guy, from the fraudster. He would get the basic, of course, shevach en loy, but he would not get from the fraudster seller the extra investment that he invested. Af al pi shapira shlois shevach. Even if the fraudster seller wrote down, I will compensate you and give you back the shevach, he will not get back the extra 500,000 investment. My time, why? The same reason we said before. Kevin the karka enloy, because Mr. Middle guy, the Schwindler guy, has no karka. The karka was never his, which means there was never a sale, and the money was in his pocket temporarily. And I call it in French, it's called a loan. It's not really a loan, but it looks like one. Because looking back at the whole history, it was a funny temporary business, which is similar to a loan. And if now Mr. Buyer will give him 1.5, excuse me, if the seller will give the buyer now 1.5, which is the just thing to do, then what's going to happen? It looks as if he's taking money for the money. Extra money for lending money is called in English ribis, and in Hebrew interest. Yeah, and in Hela, as it's written in the parsha, actually it's already in the parsha. It's written about no. I meant something else. It's not in the parsha. But the Issa ribis is known. It looks like ribis, and therefore, while Rav, by the way, is not concerned about that. According to Rav, it does not look like ribis. Enough. Rav says no. I don't see such great similarity to ribis. It's too far fetched. It's not a loan. It's not a return. It's compensation. It can say everything for Rav. For Rav's merit. Shmuel says doesn't smell nice, doesn't schmeck good, doesn't look like the Jewish thing to do, to give extra money for a loan, because that's what happens at the end of the day. That's what looks like in a silent movie, so to speak, without knowing all the background. And therefore, in such a situation, you do not give the extra, and that's Shmuel's opinion, and that's easy. That's easy. Now we're gonna add more squares into the picture because the plot thickens, and that's gonna be very nice. And so it's a good time for questions while I make my artistic moves over here. Rav is asking Rav Nachman the following question. Remember Rav Nachman's statement, because this is important. That's the statement we're going to attack and protect and attack and this and that. What did Rav Nachman say again? Remember, remember. Remember Grant, remember Lee, remember Rav Nachman. What did Rav Nachman say? Rav Nachman said that if a thief that never owned the apartment or the flat or the field, right, sold it on to the buyer, yeah, now the buyer deserves the compensation of the extra they invested. Let's say it's extra more than he gets from the real owner. Then for that extra, says Rav Nachman Shem Shmuel, he cannot go to the seller. He may be losing it. Why? Because it looks like ribis. So again, shvach, remember the Hebrew words. The shvach, the improvement of the buyer, he does not get from the gazlan. Gazlan never owned it, so it's only like a loan. A loan, to get extra for a loan, shmecks of the ugly word ribbit, like a frog. And that's why we do not want to have that being paid extra. Very nice. Now we're going to challenge that. Rabba is now challenging Rav Nachman's statement, which I just explained, from the following Mishnah in Ksubas, if I remember correctly. Ein mutzin la'achilas peiros. There are three. Let me explain first. Let me explain before we start, and that's the D word of Baruch. Due diligence. What's due diligence? Let's say I buy an apartment, yeah, and it's my achrais. The onus is on me to find out if the seller has mortgages on it, right? Let's say the seller has a mortgage of 1 million. The apartment is worth 2 million. I know maybe Khalila, the bank will take $1 million. What do? I have some kind of financial plan that if the bank will come Khalila and snatch the half an apartment for me, or even the whole apartment, if it's 2 million, I know where I'm standing. And it should be my achrayas. Maybe I have savings on the side to compensate them. Maybe it's achrayas. Yeah, of course, I'll go back. I'll do something with the knowledge that I have. But let's say my friend is a person who has a debt that's an open-ended debt. Let's say the mortgage is a very scary mortgage of something that is open-ended. That is a very scary thing. Why? Because I don't know where I'm standing. I don't know to what extent is the achrayas. In such a case, the apartment cannot be snatched away for such a person. Let me give you now 3 examples of the Mishnah. En motzin la'achilas peiros. Let's say achilas peiros, the Gemara will explain later, and I'm leaving it now. Even Rashi here does not explain what achilas peiros, because later on it will be explained. Uleshvach karkois. Shvach karkois. What shvach karkois? Shvach karkois is exactly our story. Let's say I'm a seller. Forget about the fact whether I'm a thief or not. I sold something to my buyer, and he invested. Do I have any idea how much he's going to invest? No, right? Let's say I sold the buyer with achrayas. Listen carefully to the case. My name is Mr. Seller. I sold a 1 million apartment to this buyer in Tishrei. In Cheshvan, later on, or 6 months later, I sold another field to another guy. This guy, Mr. One who bought it over here, is a very careful guy. He knows that I sold him an apartment with achrayas, that in case anything happens to the $1 million apartment, he has big shoulders, and the buyer will go back to the seller to get the million. Okay? Mr. Second buyer says, okay, I know that I'm facing $1 million, and that's it. Let's say now, months later, really something happened to the field. You know what happened? The buyer invested 5 million, or maybe $500,000. We don't know how much he's going to invest. It's open-ended, right? Now comes the buyer to the seller and says, your creditor or the bad guy over here, someone from over here who you owe money to, he came and he snatched my entire apartment. Let's ignore now the fact that he's getting more. Let's ignore it for now. So now the buyer comes to the seller. The seller says, no problem. He should go to this guy, to Mr. the one who bought it from me after you. because it was his due diligence to know that he bought something with a chrayas. Say, no, 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 no. Mele the basic million and chinami. The basic million you can go and get from this guy. The basic, yes, yes. The basic from the field that was sold later. The basic 1 million, yes. You who bought it from him, from Mr. Seller, you bought it from him after this field was sold. Yes, you knew there was a sale of 1 million, or should have known. You bought a field of 1 million. You should be careful. But the extra half a million or the extra investment, how should it be known? It's an open-ended thing. We have no idea by the time of the sale how much the buyer is going to invest. No way, Jose. And Mimela, on that you can also only get from the free field. The extra shevach, yeah, you can only get from a field that belongs to the seller that is still owned by the seller. But he cannot get it from Misken, the other lakuach, because he had no idea how much investment would the buyer invest. He's not a prophet. And Mimela, that's in one line called Ein Motzi Lachilas Peras Uleshbach Chalkois. Another case, Ulamozan Haisha V'Abonois. Yeah, somebody surprisingly, did something very strange and out of the box. He got married. And he also wrote his wife a ksuba. Wow, interesting. He wrote her ksuba for her and the future daughters. And he wrote her in the ksuba something, ksubas nun beis, you mechuyev to write to your wife, you'll have all the mezoinus as long as you're my dear wife. Yeah, I have to sustain you. Okay. And I also have to sustain your daughters until they get married. Maybe they'll get married at the age of 35. I don't know. Lamaisa, this person is a Baal Choiv. His wife is his creditor. Yeah. His wife is the woman. The wife, she's a type of like a lender. So now, let's say his wife says, darling, I did not buy a dress today. And in our standard of living, you have to buy a new dress every day. 1,000 shekels. Yeah. So Mimela, he says, I'm sorry, darling, honey, but I ran out of cash. So what would she say? Karka. You have a land, sell your land and buy me new dresses because I'm your Baal Choiv. You owe it to me. He can go to his free land, meaning unsold land, sell it and buy her dresses and a perfume and makeup and food. Very nice. However, Minichosi Mishubodim, from the sold land, you do not go to your lakuach who bought a land from you after your wedding, and the wedding is one big debt on the shoulders of the husband. You don't go to this guy. Why not? Because it's open-ended. When he got married 10, 20, 30 years ago, was there any idea how much would the wife spend? No. Do we know how much wives spend? We don't. A lot. Yeah, it's an open-ended thing. It's not something that you can predict. And there's no questions now for the next 5 minutes. Yeah, middle of the chasana now. So all these, yeah, Paris to be explained later. Shvachel kois, mozon ishav abonos. You do not collect minchosim mishubodim from the sold piece of land. You do not take open-ended debts. Why not? Mipnei tikkun olam. In order to have tikkun olam. What's tikkun olam? Not like the conservatives say. Tikkun olam means so the world, the business world, will be able to exist. Says Rashi, people will never buy a piece of land. Most people, says Rashi, or all people expect to be married at some point to a woman if he's a man, and he has a ksuba, which is a chiyuv. So every married person won't be able to do business. I'm scared. Why? Even if I bought a field from me, no married person can work in real estate. Only single guys. Why? Every real estate guy or every person who wants to sell his house in America to come to Israel, I won't be able to buy a house. You know why not? I'm buying a house from him. Maybe the house will be snatched away from me. No, don't worry. Yeah, look, these are all my papers. I only owe the bank 1 million. I'm selling you Bechrayas. If Bank of America, if Chase Manhattan Bank, I don't know who they are, if they come and chase me for the 1 million, I'll compensate you. That's very nice. Didn't you get married by mistake 30 years ago and you kind of owe money, open-ended sustenance to your wife the entire life? That's an open-ended thing. It's a bottomless pit. Such a thing you don't get from the sold land, because that, my friend Baruch, is beyond the due diligence expected of the buyer. There is no due diligence. It's an open-ended amount. So to the buyer who invested, I don't know how much is going to invest. Mainly the basic amount that you owe the buyer, you can take from the new buyer, from the later customer, from Mr. Sold over here. From here. Yeah, why? That's expected. That's known. It's a star. There's a call. Everybody knows. But the extra, how do you know how much the extra is? No question. No question. It's one of these things you have to get from beginning to the end to understand what the story is. Why is that an attack on Rav Nachman? Because listen to the words, to the subtext. Mi mishabdi, now the Gemara is medaik from the Mishnah. Mi mishabdi u'deloi matkinan. What did we just say? All we say was, from the mishubadim, we don't take from the sold, yeah, from the chosim mishubadim, you only get the basic and not the extras, right? Either extra money, any open-ended debt, you don't get from sold. Misken, it's beyond his due diligence. But look who's winking in the corner. There's hope, there's life. That guy, the husband slash borrower slash friar slash whatever, that guy has a free piece of land. So sounds like all these open-ended debts from his own land, free means unsold. You can get it from there. Yomi directly. It's not due diligence. You are the one who sold me the money. I don't care if you're married, divorced, or I don't know what you are. Lamaisa, you have your own free land, and that, of course, you should give your wife or your creditor or your lender or whoever. Now it begins to cook against Rav Nachman. Hami bnei choyrin matkinan. From bnei choyrin you do take, as I just told you. The Ktanimiya, one of the three items mentioned as those that cannot be taken from sold stuff, but can be taken from his own stuff, from the available, that's nicer English, from the available land is what? L'shvach karkos. That's our case. Look, the buyer bought a field of 1 million, invested shvach of half, and now it was snatched away from him by who? Says the Gemara, "My lab belokech mi gazlan." We assume, and soon you'll see why, that the case of this Mishnah is not just the husband b'chulei. It's a case of a person who stole, a thief. Look what it says here. The thief sold the land to the buyer. The buyer now does deserve the extra they invested. Elamai cannot take it from Mishubadim because miskenim, they're not prophets. They don't have a crystal ball. They didn't know how much he's going to invest. But from his own money, you can take. That's bad news for Rav Nachman. The entire formula, if you do put two and two together, is exactly against Rav Nachman. Let's review the whole story. We have here a case of Mr. Gazlan, who sold to Mr. Innocent Fool, Misken, who fell for the tricks, invested a lot. And what do we say? That extra investment is coming angry to him after the owner justifiably took the entire land from the buyer. Buyer goes back to Mr. Seller Gazlan. And what did the Mishnah say? You don't take from miskenim, the later customers, because they have no idea how much would be invested by the buyer. But the basic, the basic you take from them, and the extra you take from the free land of the seller. In simple words, you do give the buyer of a Gazlan the extra, and you're not concerned of ribis looking like ribis, and that's against Rav Nachman, who was concerned about looking like ribis. Boom. That's a question against Rav Nachman. Answers the Gemara quickly, and you're being very patient, but we have to give the simple answer, because then it will be twisted again. Loi, bebal choy. Answers the Gemara, very simple. No, it's not a case of a Gazlan. Erase Gazlan from the story. No, there was. I didn't even write it. He was a lender. It was a nice classical story, like all these stories in all over Shas. The guy lent money, right? If you lent money to who? To him, and it's just a regular mortgage, he's like a banker. He snatched the apartment away from the buyer, right? In that case, there's no chash ribis. Why? When is it ribis? Well, there's no real sale. When he sold the land, it was really his land. It was mortgaged to the bank from 20 years ago, but it was his, right? Then there's no chash ribis. Why is it ribis? Because there was no real sale. That's only by a Gazlan who didn't sell his own stuff, so really just lent the money. A Ganev who sells the land, it's really an illegal, funny way, ugly way to illegally borrow money. He's buying time. But that's not, then there's chash ribis. I am right, says Rav Nachman. There is chash ribis. But here there's no chash ribis because it was just a regular sale, was mortgaged to someone, and eventually the mortgage took place. Nimela, we all agree that in that case, of course, you take the extra from the free land of the seller. Now the Gemara rejects it and says, okay, I'm stopping now. It's been a long time.
Say
Yeah.
We're
Question time. You want to tell me that this entire Mishnah talks not about Ganovim and it talks about Baal Choiv, and that's how we evade and avoid the question of Rav Nachman? No confrontation with Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman spoke about the Ganav, and the Mishnah talks about Baal Choiv, and they live happily ever after, separated. Now, Ibe Baal Choiv, you want to tell me the case is Baal Choiv, Emaresha? Look at the very first case of the Mishnah, which I did not explain to you yet. Hey, don't let me get off the hook yet. Ein motzin lachilas peiros. What's achilas peiros? Achilas peiros means as follows. Let's say the buyer from the seller who may either be what? A Gazlan or a guy with a mortgage in his apartment, yeah, or in his field. Let's say he bought a real field. It's not an apartment now. A field full of what? Of apples, teacher's pet apples, yeah. And the apples were ripe and already ready to be detached from the ground. Now the buyer got a nasty knock on the door of the field and the gate of the field from the owner, who said either stolen from him or mortgaged to him, Meshubat to him, and says, I'm taking the entire field, including the nice, ripe, yummy, delicious apples. I'm taking everything, as long as it's not disconnected from the ground. So now comes the buyer crying to the seller, he took it from me, give me compensation for the land and for the payros. What happens in that case? We say the same thing. The payros are extra, and those payros cannot be taken from the seller's later customers, because that's beyond the due diligence. They didn't know how much fruit there is, and fruit is not really part of the story. It's not mentioned in Shtar. It's like this exterior thing, but from himself you can take. So far, so good. Says the Gemara, no. If you want to tell me that this entire story only talks about a mortgaged field, about not a stolen one, a Baal Choiv does not get the extra fruit. Now everyone will be happy. What was the question of Ellen and you and many people? Why is the Baal Choiv getting anything? Here you're right. If I'm owed 1 million and the fruit are 1 million point something, the fruit do not go to the Baal Choiv. It's right, obviously not. Right? If he's the one who lent money, if he's a lender does not get the extra fruit. The extra fruit stay with the buyer. They're his, right? And therefore, and soon we'll explain also why. Explain even more. Shmuel says it himself. Baal Choiv goy b'eshevach. Baal Choiv does get the improved house, the fancy new kitchen, the extra money. The shevach inav peros loy. The shevach is a separate story we dealt with before, but peros he doesn't get. So who does get the extra? Again, remember, when we say that everything was snatched from the buyer and given to the one who took it from him, being evasive on purpose, who's the one took it from him? If it's just a creditor, a lender, no, the lender never gets those fruits. So the whole story never started. He did not stay with nothing. He stayed with the fruit. Must be, you know who took away his fruit? You know who does take the fruit? The one that was stolen from. Why? The one that was stolen from can come and say to the buyer, I feel so bad from you. I feel bad for you and me. He stole from me and gave it to you. But you know what? I'm sorry. Those apples that grew, you know where they grew? In my field. As opposed to the creditor who never owned the field, the nigzal, the victim, really owned the field. So he says to him, honey, Mr. Buyer, I do get the apples. Why? Because they grew in my field. My field was, you paid for the fertilizer? You paid the Thai worker? I'll pay for that. But of course, I'm the owner of the actual apples who grew in the field that always was mine. So must be the duration. The first case out of the three talks about a person who stole. Says the Gemara with the Reisha, the goys of an Igzal, Sefer Nami goys of an Igzal. If the first case of the Mishnah that talks about fruit can only fit into description of a field that was stolen, because the field mortgage, you don't give the extra fruit, must be the second case which bothers Rav Nachman, the case of the improvement, the Shevach, the invested kitchen and chandelier, also talks about Gezel and Igzal. Oh, and you're telling me now that what? That if a field was stolen, the buyer has to give back the nice improved apartment to Mr. Owner, for whichever reason we discussed, and he goes back to get the extra money they invested from the guy himself, from the seller, and that's bad news for Rav Nachman, who said it in this case it's like ribis. Says the Gemara, easy answer. Midi, no problem. Midi, Ilya, is that the same? Hokadisa, Isa. That's the attempt answer, and I think we'll finish for today. The one possible answer is no. The Mishnah spoke about three different cases. One is about a woman, that's all different case. The first case is about Paris taken away from a stolen, a thief. And the second case of Shevach speaks about a person who borrowed money, and what? And sold on the field. And that field now was improved, or the house was improved with a nice kitchen, a nice bathroom, and tiles worth $500,000 more, right? That house definitely, only in the case of Baal Choiv, you do go back to the seller and ask for the extra. But in case of theft, Rav Nachman is right. In case of theft, we say no. Because the theft is not a real sale, it was like a loan. And getting extra money for something that looks like a loan and looks like ribis, we are so ribis intolerant, we don't allow that. And I stick to my gun, says Rav Nachman. Chazara, today, YouTube. Before Halacha, the Gemara is going to go through more twists and turns. Tomorrow, Halacha is, you have to be holech. אתה צריך ללכת הרבה, ללכת, until you get to the Halacha. Tomorrow, we'll do a bit of Chazara. We'll do Hemshech Be'ezus Hashem. It's going to be even easier than today. Atzlachan, we have a good elul of a Melas Torah, to work hard in Torah. That's the best eitzah for Yomi Din, is to be immersed in Hashem's holy Torah. Thank you very much. Atzlacha u'bracha. Chodesh Tov, Elul Tov. Thank you very much.